Hey everybody, welcome back. Good to see you all again this week. So hopefully you're watching this on Wednesday, March 25th, week 2 of our pandemic. Oof. Make sure you are staying up to date with what's happening with school and the news, but don't stay too up to date and just get totally consumed by the news because it is kind of a rabbit hole that just keeps going on forever. So I'm going to try to answer a lot of questions I imagine you guys will have today about AP. Um, and I also wanted to kind of keep moving forward with our curriculum a little bit. And I wanted to get to the subject of fascism. So today we'll be talking about how did fascists like Mussolini and Hitler rise to power. I will be posting a Inner Warriors homework check part 2 for chapter 19. It should be up by the time that the weekly update is out, by the time you know to be watching this video. So as of you now watching it, right, you should be able to see that homework check up on Schoology. It'll be another kind of 7 to 8 questions, so it'll kind of finish off chapter 19 for you, and it'll complement the first homework check we had. I did want to make a note that as of recording this video, I have less than half of my students in all of my classes who have actually done the first homework check, which is really odd to me. It's like an AP course, guys. Come on. Definitely keep up with the curriculum. I know it's not graded, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Also, the moment you complete the comp check, you will get the ability to look at how you did and what you got wrong. I will be answering some questions. If you have any, just shoot me a message over Schoology and I'll make sure to answer your questions. You'll notice that your blue sheet has like 31 or 2 terms, and it actually covers both Chapter 19 and a portion of Chapter 20. We will be finishing Chapter 19, but we will not be starting Chapter 20. So ignore all those Chapter 20 terms about kind of the road to World War II. We're just going to focus on the interwar years before the outbreak of World War II. So my guess is you guys have a lot of questions about some of those updates that College Board pushed out regarding the AP tests. In case you missed it, the College Board will still be having the AP test for all their classes, including AP Euro this May. But there are some changes. It's going to be an online test, so you can take it from home with your notes. They're saying that the test should only take about 45 minutes, and as you can reasonably imagine, there's no way that this test is going to have multiple choice questions in an online test, right? So for that reason, it's going to be free response only. I imagine for us, this is like 3 to 4 SAQs. So that's kind of where I'm going to push my attention. The details on this are shaky. As you can see, there's also supposed to be some AP like curriculum classes being live streamed starting March 25th. So by the time you're watching this video, I have yet to see those. I don't know what those are going to look like. A lot of us AP teachers are still kind of in the dark about all the finer details of this. What we do know is that the test will only cover European history from what they call units 1 through 7, what we would call HI 1 through 6. And in terms of real life years, that's 1450 to 1914 Common Era. So that means that the test is actually going to cover things we've done in class. So that's actually probably a relief for a lot of you. And it's a relief for me because we don't have to rush through curriculum. So you might be wondering, well, Mr. White, why are you going to keep like teaching about like the inner warriors if it's not going to be on the test? The reality is that just because something doesn't show up on the AP test doesn't mean it doesn't matter. And I would like to kind of keep up with the curriculum. I imagine a lot of you are kind of excited to learn about the interwar years, and it's a really crucial part of history. The kind of outbreak of the deadliest war in human history is definitely important. So yeah, in future videos, I will be redirecting us a little bit more towards reviewing this period of history from 1450 to 1914. But definitely this class will not stop teaching history after 1914. We're going to keep going. I do expect that by the time you are done with this course in June, that you have some understanding of the interwar years, World War II, and the Cold War. And my in-class tests, assuming we come back to school sometime in April or May, and my in-class final will have questions on the interwar years, World War II and the Cold War, because I do think that they're arguably the most important units in this course because they give you a lot of insight into why the world is the way it is right now. So with that being said, let's move forward. So we have our weekly update, right? This is what's posted to Schoology. Your job this week is to review the 20th century as a crisis of thought and expression, as well as money, something we've already talked about. And if last week we were doing that through the example of communism and Stalin, this week we're doing it with the example of totalitarian fascism with Hitler and Mussolini. We have a couple different resources for you to use today. I have a Mein Kampf reading that I will redirect you to, and then we have Umberto Eco and his Fascism, which I will redirect you to as well. Your reading today is to finish the rest of chapter 19. That's pages 716 through 738. So that's about 22 pages of reading this week. And work on about 7 terms, numbers 14 through 20. And then watch this video, which you're doing right now, which is great. Finally, yeah, complete that comp check. It's ungraded, and it should be on Schoology by the time you watch this. So go ahead and actually get out that Mein Kampf reading that's linked in the weekly update. And we're going to kind of get over to that in 1 second. Before we do, I wanted to kind of quickly review some of our big topics. Remember, there's 2 crises in Europe, one of mind and one of money. We have a total loss of faith in modern institutions of logic, reasoning, capitalism, democracy, religion, and anything else associated with Europe before the Great War. And we also have a loss of confidence in the economy, thanks to the economic collapse that happens by the end of the Great War, as well as the Great Depression that follows in 1929. And the response from a lot of governments to this uncertainty and these crises of confidence is a rise of totalitarianism. Remember, we reviewed this as a governing system in which a ruling elite holds all power and controls all aspects of a society, allowing no opposition and often maintaining power with the use of terror and a secret police force. Think like any dictatorships with only one legal party that tend to rule through fear. They tend to censor the press, control all public discourse. They usually mandate military service and scapegoat the failings of governments on minorities and other peoples that the government deems to be problematic. So last week we kind of brought up the right-wing version of totalitarianism, fascism, right? Fascism is this political philosophy that marked by a strong central authority, right? That places the nation and often race above everything else. Nationalism is the core element of fascism, right? It almost is as if nationalism was taken to its logical conclusion, what would government look like? Just a government built around nationalism to its core, right? And for that reason, fascism is really strange and different, and we're going to be looking at it in depth today. The kind of best example of fascism is actually Mussolini's Italy, because they created it, right? Fascism is a name that comes from Mussolini. He actually coined the term, and he himself was also a dictator, right? Fascism implies a totalitarian dictatorship. And you can actually see his gigantic face on the headquarters of the Fascist Party HQ in Rome. And then there's those wall of C's, meaning yes, right behind it. Okay, I have a visitor who's getting ever closer. Phoebe, say hi to everyone. This is my cat. She's cute and she's wandering around like a derp. All right, there you go. Right. Okay. So go ahead and get out this reading. And okay. Yep. Hi, Phoebe. Yep. Okay. So go ahead and get out this reading. And take a look at it. So on the first page of it, you're going to notice that there is, and yes, I have a cat on me who's a nerd. So on the front page of it, you're going to notice that a lot of it's review, kind of reviewing the strength of Mussolini and the strengths of Hitler via your textbook. And then the second half of it is like this kind of reading and response notes portion with Hitler's Mein Kampf. And so we'll get to that a little bit later. So let's just start with this first portion. Why don't you take a moment actually to review Mussolini in your textbook and complete just this very first portion on the notes, and just kind of read up on Mussolini. I don't think you're going to be able to continue with this if you don't know who Mussolini is. So go ahead. Feel free to pause the video and come back when you're confident that you know who Mussolini is and how he came to power. My cat's purring. Okay. All right, great. So welcome back. I'm hoping you're having a feeling about who Mussolini is now. I'd like to actually review this a little bit. I originally was going to play about 25 minutes of a documentary from A&E on Mussolini, but that documentary has been removed from YouTube and everywhere else on the internet due to copyright claims. So I have a backup video to show you. It's not nearly as high quality, but it does actually draw from the A&E documentary I wanted to show you. I have no idea who Mojo is or what the heck's going on here. This person just totally stole a bunch of content from A&E, which is fine because they cite it, but it's basically a review of a video that's since been taken down on YouTube. The good news is it's only 5 minutes, so we'll just watch it real quick. Oh, that's not what I wanted to hit. Here we go.
He was Il Duce. Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we'll be learning more about the life of Benito Mussolini. Benito Amilcare Andrea Mussolini was born July 29, 1883 in Predappio, Italy. Due to his father's political inclinations, he was named after prominent socialist leaders. Mussolini was a disruptive but intelligent student. He developed beliefs similar to his father's and joined the Socialist Party in 1900. After graduating, he worked briefly as a teacher before moving to Switzerland in 1902 to evade military service. In 1904, Mussolini was deported to Italy and served 2 years in the army. He was soon considered one of the country's foremost socialists, and after becoming editor of the Socialist Party newspaper Avanti, he significantly improved readership. When World War I began in 1914,
this is crucial. So he's writing for this newspaper that's a communist newspaper called Avanti. Communist, okay? Keep that in mind. So he goes to war.
The Socialist Party disapproved of Italian intervention. Mussolini eventually supported the war, and this got him ejected from the party. He then aligned himself with revolutionary nationalist beliefs and produced the pro-war newspaper Il Popolo d'Italia.
So as you can see, the war basically severs his relationship with the Italian Communist Party, right? Italian communists are usually pacifist against war, especially against war they see as imperialist. And so for this reason, when Mussolini supports the war, he realizes that all of his support he got from the Communist Party is gone. He loses his position writing for Avanti, so he creates his own splinter movement within the Italian Communist Party that is like a pro-war communism. And it quickly morphs away from communism towards this intense, fervorous nationalism. And the newspaper is called Il Popolo d'Italia, or the people of Italy, right? Already stressing this kind of populist theme.
In 1915, Mussolini rejoined the army and served in the war before an injury sent him back to his newspaper job. By 1919, he created the Italian Combat Squad as an alternative to socialism. This coincided with a period of Italian social discord known as the Biennio Rosso, or 2 Red Years, when his paramilitary fascist black shirts publicly sparred with socialists and other groups. In 1921, the Combat Squad became the National Fascist Party, and Mussolini won a seat in the Italian Chamber of Deputies.
So as you can see here, this movement actually starts less so much of as a political movement, but almost as much as like a group of military or ex-military thugs, right? So in the wake of World War I, you had all these unemployed Italian soldiers, right, in this devastated Italian economy, and Mussolini is literally willing to pay them to march around and support his movement. And so they basically turn into this almost like these shock troops, these thugs who kind of beat up the people Mussolini doesn't like. The salute, the kind of, we're familiar with it now as the Nazi salute, right? But that salute is actually taken as an old Roman salute. Even the name Fascist Party refers to the fasci, kind of an ancient Roman symbol. So this is all Roman iconography, right? So these are Roman symbols, Roman icons, Roman salutes, and this is being used to stress the idea of to make Italy great again, right? If Italy was more like ancient Rome, that would be good because ancient Rome was wonderful. So you're going to see a lot of that symbology going on with both Italy and eventually the Nazis.
His party was soon ready for power. In October 1922, the March on Rome resulted in the Fascist Party seizing power. On October 31, 1922, Benito Mussolini became the 40th Prime Minister of Italy and the youngest to that point. Mussolini spent the next years...
Oops, that's not what I wanted. Let me fix that. Okay.
Then began colonizing political... 1920. Mussolini spent the next years disassembling the Italian democratic system.
Okay, sorry, I missed it. Let me go back and show you what I want to show you.
The March on Rome resulted in the Fascist Party seizing power.
That's false. So, the video skips something. The March on Rome did not result in Mussolini seizing power. That is absolutely incorrect. What really happened was during the March on Rome, Mussolini threatened to seize power. But the problem is that Mussolini had already been granted constitutional powers and been appointed prime minister of the Italian government before the March on Rome. In fact, Italian political leaders were so worried that he would seize power in a coup during his scheduled March on Rome that they actually constitutionally gave him political power before the March on Rome under the agreement that he would then cancel the march because they didn't want that. Mussolini was furious. He wanted to seize power in a coup because that's what cool, strong people do. They seize power. So what he ends up doing, actually, is he goes ahead with the march. And he lies to people and he tells them that he seized power via the March on Rome and not because he was given power, legally speaking, through the Italian constitution that he had no care for. In reality, he obtained power legally through Italy's constitution, through maybe not the most democratic process, but technically a legal process. The March on Rome was just all there for show. And Mussolini wanted people to think he seized power because that made him look strong.
On October 31, 1922, Benito Mussolini became the 40th Prime Minister of Italy and the youngest to that point. Mussolini spent the next years disassembling the Italian democratic system, using propaganda to portray himself as the only man capable of unifying the country, and transforming Italy into a one-party state. In 1925, he made himself dictator and took the title of Il Duce, or the leader. The fascists were accused of using violent force to crush political foes. However, despite some assassination attempts, Mussolini was initially widely supported due to his efforts fighting unemployment and financial decline. One of Mussolini's most significant...
This is an interesting element of fascism. Fascism does draw from some elements of socialism in both the Nazis and with Mussolini because fascists believe in utilizing the full power of nationalism in the state. So you actually see Mussolini pay for these massive works and employment programs that actually win him a lot of popularity, and it helps stimulate the Italian economy.
Significant achievements was the Lateran Pact of 1929. This treaty settled the long-standing dispute between Italy and the Roman Catholic Church and created the independent state of Vatican City. Mussolini then began colonizing African countries to create a new Roman Empire. For example, 1935's Ethiopian War resulted in that country's seizure by the Italian Empire. In 1936, Mussolini sent military aid to Spanish dictator Francisco Franco in the Spanish Civil War.
Mussolini was big on powering up his military, so as you can see here, he sends troops to conquer Ethiopia to avenge Italy's loss in 1895 and 6. It works. He does succeed in conquering Ethiopia.
This pushed Mussolini closer to Nazi Germany's dictator Adolf Hitler, though their early relationship was unstable. To strengthen ties, Mussolini adopted the anti-Semitic Manifesto of Race in 1938, despite disagreeing with its premise. In 1939, the Pact of Steel solidified the Rome-Berlin axis of 1936. Despite this, Italy initially remained uninvolved in World War II, following Germany's invasion of Poland. By June 1940, Mussolini thought the war was almost over, so he entered Italy in the conflict as an Axis power by declaring war on Britain and France. Losses in Greece and North Africa soon showed Italy's military shortcomings. From 1942, Mussolini steadily lost support. Following the Allied invasion of Sicily in July 1943, he was ousted from power by the Italian king and subsequently arrested. In his absence, the Fascist Party was disbanded and a truce was signed with the Allies. Germany then invaded Italy in September 1943. Meanwhile, German forces freed Mussolini from prison. He wished to retire from politics. However, he ended up Hitler's puppet as head of a new fascist regime called the Italian Socialist Republic. The Allied presence then spread northward through Italy. On April 27, 1945, as Mussolini attempted to escape to Switzerland, he was captured by Italian partisans and executed by firing squad the next day. His body was then hung in a Milan town square to dissuade other fascists from carrying on the cause. Due to his vanity, womanizing, and egotism, Benito Mussolini shaped Italian and world history and proved himself as one of the 20th century's most controversial dictators.
So, that's Mussolini, right? Let me kind of back up here. Let me resume the presentation. So, what I would like to redirect your attention now to is this concept of fascism by Umberto Eco. So if you could pull up this reading, I encourage you to read all of this. It's only 8 to 9 pages. It's really interesting. I think many of you will find this really interesting. It ties into a lot of the concepts we've actually learned about in this course so far. So Umberto Eco grew up during this kind of period of high fascism, right? He was born in the 30s. He grew up with Mussolini running his country, right? He talks about how in 1942 he was the age of 10, right? Umberto Eco ends up becoming this really important historian and social scientist who makes a lot of core arguments to understanding what the heck is fascism. He actually doesn't even prefer to call it fascism. He calls it fascism, which basically means this kind of concept that there are many fascisms. Fascism is the better name for it because fascism is Mussolini's term, right? To call more than one thing fascist is wrong because wouldn't that be referring to Mussolini's Italy? Like fascism has to mean Mussolini's Italy, right? So is there capital F fascism or lowercase f fascism? Anyways, to kind of move through all of this, Umberto Eco calls this kind of core concept fascism, right? And he kind of goes onto this definition of it. And his definition makes a lot of sense to me because many of you are probably, as you're reading, figuring out that fascism is weird. It doesn't seem to follow any clear ideological underpinning. Marxist-Leninism, communism, syndicalism, democratic socialism, liberalism, conservatism, divine right monarchy, all of these things have serious political scientists supporting the theory behind them, right? You have Marx, you have Lenin, right? You have Sorel with syndicalism, right? You have Edouard de Bernstein with democratic socialism. You have John Stuart Mill with liberalism. You have Edmund Burke with conservatism. You have Bossuet with divine right monarchy, right? There is so much thinking behind these political systems. And then there's fascism, which Mussolini just comes up with out of convenience, right? Mussolini is definitely not what we would call a, critical and logical thinker. So fascism lacks a lot of the ideological underpinnings that these other forms of government have. Instead, the kind of different fascisms we see around the world, whether it's in Italy, Spain, Germany, Japan, Portugal, Argentina, and elsewhere, Venezuela, right? All of these places have these sort of fascist-ish governments, but what they all have in common is this emphasis on a cult of tradition, a rejection of modernity, a fear of diversity and difference. They tend to appeal to frustrated members of the middle class. They obsess over plots to overthrow the good people, the government, whether it be Jews with Germany, Westerners in Japan, or weaklings in Italy. They love action and combat and war, and they love bluster and getting things done. They love being manly. There's this culture of machismo, this contempt for the weak or the feminine, and this contempt for what they see as rotten democracies. And they usually also have contempt for the media, and they have their own kind of twists on language that some people call newspeak, right? That Orwell kind of defines in his famous book, 1984. So you have this rise of this very totalitarian, but at the same time very right-wing hyper-nationalist government in Italy. In Germany, you have a totally different story that's also somewhat similar and highly influenced by Mussolini. Remember, Mussolini takes charge in 1921 and 22. At the exact same time as this, you have this Austrian art school reject named Adolf Hitler who joins the Bavarian army. The war makes him a devout nationalist. And after the war, he co-founds, along with a few other guys, this Nationalist Socialist Workers' Party. Again, we see this early mix with socialism. And I think the kind of trend and the pattern you should be seeing here is that they were against establishment governments, right? They did not like standard liberal democracy. So at first, both Hitler and Mussolini were drawn to socialism until they figured out how much ideology and rigor was in these kinds of concepts, and they didn't have patience for it, right? So instead, in this Nationalist Socialist Workers' Party, Hitler is part of the nationalist wing of this party. In fact, early on, even in the Night of the Long Knives in 1934, he assassinates a lot of the socialist elements of the Nazi party. Since, again, he's an art school reject, he's the one who actually designs the logo for the Nazi party. So it's actually Hitler did indeed design the swastika. By 1923, after watching Mussolini's success in Italy, he thinks he can pull off the same thing in Germany, but he's very wrong, right? Unlike in Italy, where Mussolini is actually seriously popular, Hitler is not so popular. In his infamous beer hall putsch, right, he's sent to prison in this kind of pathetic attempt to overtake the government. But he does make the front page of the news. He believed the people were behind him the same way people were behind Mussolini, right? Remember, Mussolini's Italy won the war, but its economy had been hurt. It did not win much territory from Austria. And so many Italians were less frustrated with the war itself than they were with feeling like they didn't have a strong enough leadership that advocated for Italy. Germany, meanwhile, lost the war, right? They're very skeptical now of this kind of hyper-nationalist fervor. They're in a democracy, and Hitler thinks that because they're suffering with all this hyperinflation, right, because they're having all these problems with the Treaty of Versailles, the people will want him, but the people don't. They're too skeptical of nationalism and warmongers. So, the beer hall putsch fails, and we would like to think that that's when Hitler's story ends. But in actuality, Hitler gets even crazier after the putsch. Some people might even say that it really pushed him over the edge. I'm a terrible person. So, as you can see in the May 1924 elections, after Hitler gets out of prison, right? Hitler is in prison. There's a small boost of how many votes the Nazi Party gets because of the fame they get from the beer hall putsch. While in prison, Hitler writes Mein Kampf and then publishes it. And after Hitler's released from prison in the next election in December 1924, they get 3% of the vote. 1928, 2.6%. As you can see, the Nazi Party is a footnote, and it is often considered like this ridiculous fringe right-wing party that only cuckoos would ever vote for. Then the Great Depression ends. And Hitler, mind you, had been telling people that capitalism was doomed, that liberal democratic governments were doomed, that a Jewish conspiracy is trying to take over the world. He had been telling people that the end days were coming, that everything terrible was going to happen, and that the German people's only hope was to rally behind him. And then the Great Depression hits, and Hitler goes, "You see?" And a lot of people turn to Hitler as this strange source of strength. During all of this, they see him as being smart. They see him as being the guy who gets it. When in reality, he just got really lucky that a Great Depression hit and swung public opinion in his favor. And so he actually gets a solid 18% of people to vote for him as a real minority candidate in 1930. This legitimizes him. People start to take him seriously. He gets invited to speeches, to debates, and that's when people figure out and the masses start to understand that this guy is a really good public speaker, right? And because of this, he's able to convince a growing portion of Germans that he's legit, his movement is legit, and by July 1932, he gets over a third of the German vote, still not a majority. At this point, he's a candidate for the presidency, which is not the most powerful position in Germany. And because the conservatives are actually in decline and the Socialist Party, the SDP, right, is rising, and the kind of conservative and center party is concerned that they'll lose power to these socialists, they form a coalition government with the Nazis. Now, the Nazis are actually the larger part of the coalition government, so as a deal, President Paul von Hindenburg makes Hitler Chancellor of Germany. The belief is that the conservative political elites will control Hitler and they'll basically just use the Nazis. But instead, Hitler controls him. And after Hindenburg dies of old age, Hitler will be appointed Chancellor and basically rule Germany with an iron fist. So go ahead and go back to the Mein Kampf reading and work through it. Read those excerpts. And I'll see you guys in a moment here. Sound good? Okay, see you then. What? Okay, everybody, welcome back. So hopefully at this point you've read Mein Kampf over a little bit and the excerpts from it a little bit. You're starting to get a feel for Hitler's ideology. You can see that he's not the world's greatest writer or thinker. And he has all of these terrible views on everything, right? So I want to review Hitler's rise and Mein Kampf and some of his core ideas with this video that was actually made by Ted Ed a little bit. A lot of people are interested in how did Hitler gain power. I mean, he's this crazy madman, right? This video from Ted Ed kind of helps us understand.
How did Adolf Hitler, a tyrant who orchestrated one of the largest genocides in human history, rise to power in a democratic country? The story begins at the end of World War I. With the successful Allied advance in 1918, Germany realized the war was unwinnable and signed an armistice ending the fighting. As its imperial government collapsed, civil unrest and worker strikes spread across the nation. Fearing a communist revolution, major parties joined to suppress the uprisings, establishing the parliamentary Weimar Republic. One of the new government's first tasks was implementing the peace treaty imposed by the Allies. In addition to losing over a tenth of its territory and dismantling its army, Germany had to accept full responsibility for the war and pay reparations, debilitating its already weakened economy. All this was seen as a humiliation by many nationalists and veterans. They wrongly believed the war could have been won if the army hadn't been betrayed by politicians and protesters. For Hitler, these views became obsession, and his bigotry and paranoid delusions led him to pin the blame on Jews. His words found resonance in a society with many anti-Semitic people. By this time, hundreds of thousands of Jews had integrated into German society, but many Germans continued to perceive them as outsiders. After World War I, Jewish success led to ungrounded accusations of subversion and war profiteering. It cannot be stressed enough that these conspiracy theories were born out of fear, anger, and bigotry, not fact. Nonetheless, Hitler found success with them. When he joined a small nationalist political party, his manipulative public speaking launched him into its leadership and drew increasingly larger crowds. Combining anti-Semitism with populist resentment, the Nazis denounced both communism and capitalism as international Jewish conspiracies to destroy Germany. The Nazi Party was not initially popular. After they made an unsuccessful attempt at overthrowing the government, the party was banned, and Hitler jailed for treason. But upon his release about a year later, he immediately began to rebuild the movement. And then, in 1929, the Great Depression happened. It led to American banks withdrawing their loans from Germany, and the already struggling German economy collapsed overnight. Hitler took advantage of the people's anger, offering them convenient scapegoats and a promise to restore Germany's former greatness. Mainstream parties proved unable to handle the crisis, while left-wing opposition was too fragmented by internal squabbles. And so, some of the frustrated public flocked to the Nazis, increasing their parliamentary votes from under 3% to over 18% in just 2 years. In 1932, Hitler ran for president, losing the election to decorated war hero General von Hindenburg. But with 36% of the vote, Hitler had demonstrated the extent of his support. The following year, advisors and business leaders convinced Hindenburg to appoint Hitler as chancellor, hoping to channel his popularity for their own goals. Though the chancellor was only the administrative head of parliament, Hitler steadily expanded the power of his position. While his supporters formed paramilitary groups and fought protesters in the streets, Hitler raised fears of a communist uprising and argued that only he could restore law and order. Then, in 1933, a young worker was convicted of setting fire to the Parliament building. Hitler used the event to convince the government to grant him emergency powers. Within a matter of months, freedom of the press was abolished, other parties were disbanded, and anti-Jewish laws were passed. Many of Hitler's early radical supporters were arrested and executed, along with potential rivals. And when President Hindenburg died in August 1934, it was clear there would be no new election. Disturbingly, many of Hitler's early measures didn't require mass repression. His speeches exploited people's fear and ire to drive their support behind him and the Nazi Party. Meanwhile, businessmen and intellectuals wanting to be on the right side of public opinion endorsed Hitler. They assured themselves and each other that his more extreme rhetoric was only for show. Decades later, Hitler's rise remains a warning of how fragile democratic institutions can be in the face of angry crowds and a leader willing to feed their anger and exploit their fears.
Right? So what I would like to do at this point is first resume this presentation. I actually wanted to kind of give you an example of what some of Hitler's anti-Jewish propaganda looked like in the wake of things like the Nuremberg laws and others, in which he's actually kind of coming in and making clear policies about the roles of Jews in German society. There's this movie called Der ewige Jude, which in German means the eternal Jew. And so I wanted to show a little clip of it. It's pretty disturbing. Before I do, I wanted to remind you that this is kind of the end of this PowerPoint, and to make sure you take your part 2 of your chapter 19 homework check, shoot me any questions if you have any. And wow, I really hope this wasn't taken down. Oh, because it's Nazi-ish, but it's educational. There's gotta be. Yeah, oh my god, they removed it. Huh. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think maybe they should have kept it. This is actually a clip from it. Anyways, it's Nazi propaganda that compares Jews to rats and other things. It's terrible. It gets the point across of how Germans portrayed Jews. What they're trying to show you on this map here is the spread of Jews, almost as if it's like a pandemic or disease. So with that being said, I feel like this is everything I wanted to go over today. So make sure you complete this handout. I think it'll be really helpful to you. You'll actually find a lot of this really interesting. It's not in every class where you literally assign to read Mein Kampf, right? This is AP Euro. I also encourage you to review Umberto Eco's Fascism. It'll help you kind of make sense of fascism. The reading is downright great. Umberto Eco is an amazing writer. I think you'll enjoy it. So if you have any other questions, shoot me a message over Schoology. And thanks, guys. I'll see you all next week. It's been fun.